A lot of the assumptions made in traditional cost accounting are not designed for making business decisions. They're designed for creating financial statements at the end of the month.
Most manufacturers talk about profitability as if it's this mysterious thing. Margin pressure, market conditions, maybe bad luck. But J. David has spent the last 30 years proving that that's backwards. Profitability isn't luck, it's about understanding one thing, the relationship between capacity utilization and your fixed costs. Get that right and everything follows. Jake has worked as a fractional COO, he's helped turn around large manufacturing operations, and he's now written 3 books challenging how founders think about finance and operations. He started as a cost accountant in a candy manufacturing business, but instead of just staying at his desk and crunching numbers, he spent his time out on the shop floor learning about what actually drives profitability. And that's where this conversation gets really interesting. We dig into why so many manufacturers make the wrong decision when it comes to pricing and capacity. We talk about what he learned early on and that most leaders miss, and we get practical. What should a manufacturer do this week to improve their profitability? This is a conversation for anyone running or leading a manufacturing business. No theory, just 30 years of real experience and some hard truths about how to run a profitable business. I'm Martin, this is Manufacturers Make Strides. Let's get into my conversation with J. David. Hello, Jay. How are you doing today?
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Really good to have you on the podcast today. Looking forward to getting into all things manufacturing, finance, and operations. But just tell us first off, where you're joining from today?
I'm in El Paso, Texas, at the far, far, far west side of Texas, more New Mexico than actually Texas.
What's the weather like there at the moment? Is it a bit hot?
We're hitting 100 just about every day. That's Fahrenheit. I know you have that other scale, but...
Perfect. Yeah, I'll do some maths and figure out what that converts to. We'll get to your background. I like to jump in with a question just that really kind of sets a tone for how you think. So, what would you say profitable manufacturers understand that sets them apart from other businesses?
The biggest thing is when you build a huge factory and invest tens of millions of dollars in building it, it's understanding that you can't run that operation on a one shift and cover all of those fixed costs. So there's the challenge there of understanding the relationship between capacity utilization, and then that drives the price you can go to market with. Good manufacturers understand that utilizing that fixed cost capacity is the most important thing to profitability.
All right. Well, there's a lot to dig into within that, but let's hold fire on that. I think that just sets the scene. And just tell me what first brought you into manufacturing. What was your background? What was your first experience of manufacturing?
My career started in a different way. I went to college only to play baseball, and my batting average was more important than my grade point average. And I went to college only 1 year, played, and then left, and then I got in the restaurant business and managed and opened up new locations. When I got married and had a kid, I realized that lifestyle was not going to be very good going forward. So one day after work, I drove to a local community college that I had attended for baseball, signed up for one class, and realized that that was my path. So I worked my way toward a bachelor's degree in accounting, the last 2 years of which I was bartending at a riverboat casino, working evenings. And while I was bartending in the back of the house, more of a service bar, I was doing my homework for accounting. So I chose accounting because I had a strong numbers background, but I also knew that I could get a job. When I graduated, the first job that I took just out of a newspaper ad was a cost accountant at a candy manufacturing business in Chicago. They had 4 plants in Chicago, a large distribution center, and then another one in Oklahoma. So I learned manufacturing there from the bottom up. As a cost accountant, you're primarily focused on valuing inventory at the end of the month to get to the cost of goods sold number, but we also worked on productivity and some other things. So I spent as little time as possible at my desk working on the accounting side. I did what I needed to do there, but I spent all my time on the manufacturing floor working with plant managers on cost savings, productivity, and just really learning the nuts and bolts out there.
What would you say some of those early experiences on the shop floor taught you then?
I took my what I learned from cost accounting and the traditional methods and the way that costs are calculated and really learned from the beginning of how all the allocations work, how the accumulation of labor cost gets into a unit cost of a case of product or something like that. So I did all of my work based on those assumptions. And we did a couple of big projects, multi-million dollar projects on automation, line upgrades, and things like that. But what I found is a lot of the assumptions that we built into the CapEx to get it justified never came true. And over time, I migrated more into the operations side. And I realized once I got on the other side that a lot of the assumptions made in traditional cost accounting, GAAP, generally accepted accounting principle rules, are not designed for making business decisions. They're designed for creating financial statements at the end of the month from a compliance perspective. That was the biggest kind of shock to me when I jumped on the other side of the fence.
Okay, go yeah. So just go back to that. You mentioned earlier that in some of those automation projects or capital expenditure projects, a lot of the assumptions that were made didn't really kind of pan out. Is that related to what you've just mentioned, though, that you think that way of accounting is more to do with monthly reporting than how to plan out, to kind of forecast or plan out, or is that something else?
Well, when you come at it from a GAAP perspective, what we did there is we allocated overhead based on labor usage. So every dollar of labor carried $2.35 of overhead with it. So in a simplistic way, if you take a production line and you reduce labor in it, in a simplistic way, every dollar of labor you reduce, you also are reducing $2.35 of overhead. And that's how the accounting rolls up. That's not the case at all. The assumption in all of that is that overhead expenses are variable and that they're easy to adjust. Even labor is not variable and easy to adjust in a manufacturing environment. So that was kind of that light bulb moment where I said, you know what, things aren't working out the way that I thought here.
Okay, go yeah, yeah. No, I understand that. That makes sense. So, can you remember a moment in your career then, or maybe yeah, just one specific moment, or maybe a few specific moments where that really kind of triggered that light bulb moment or that turning point in your career of where you thought, this isn't working?
I'll give you a short little process of kind of where I went. So I jumped out of accounting and started working in operations in a company that had bought us. We became part of an $800 million company, and I was the cost accounting controller for that business. We had 10 factories, 5 different ERP systems. So that was kind of a moment of chaos that I had to kind of clean up, get some people in to do the job. Then I jumped to manufacturing. My first job over there was to consolidate a lot of the information from all those ERP systems, but also I was thrown into a project to close 2 factories and to transfer production and outsource some product. So it was then that it really smacked me that as we really looked at the full economics of the building and said, okay, when we close this, here's all the fixed savings that we're going to get. Well, a lot of that transfers over to other businesses. So there I had a foot in operations, but still the finance mind. later I moved into full operations leadership to where I had full responsibility for the P&L. And that's where things started to leak. And especially from the labor perspective, you ask any accountant in the world and ask them if direct labor is variable, meaning if it takes 5 people to make 10 cases of product a minute, you can go to 10 people and you're going to get 20 cases per minute. Or backwards, if you cut, you're going to get the same thing. Sounds good theoretically, but you can't treat people that way and say, we don't have production today, go home. So things started to unravel as I dug deeper into all of those costs. And the problem with the entire process is when you're building your budget, you build it out, rent, insurance, medical insurance costs, office supplies, travel, everything. You come up with a big budget there, and then the sales team puts their budget in, and you get units of sales, which drive the production budget. And then you do all the division to come up with what those costs are on a per case basis. So you've taken rent cost or depreciation, which are fixed costs. The minute you've done that division, you've made them variable. So the assumption all along is that it acts in a variable nature. And that doesn't sound terrible until you figure out that you're using that same information to price your product. So when a new business opportunity comes in and you say it's an incremental 10 million pounds of production, every million pounds or every pound carries this much labor, this much overhead. And then you start to price your product and then you don't get the business. And it's not because you weren't competitive in itself. It's because you built in all of your inefficiencies into that budget, all of your unused capacity into that budget to cover it. And then now that you're pricing, you can't price. So I call that process the death spiral. So if you can't compete, you can't bring in more product, therefore you can't cover your fixed costs, and then you struggle for volume and you're not profitable. And then the worst thing you can do is then do an analysis customer by customer to say who's profitable, who's not. When you do that analysis, you've got 4 customers that aren't profitable, maybe 50 items, and then you decide to fire them and move on because you think that getting rid of them is going to improve the P&L, but it actually doesn't. So that was probably a 7 to 10 year process of really understanding that. And that helped me understand why businesses fail and why they struggle years before they finally fail.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, that must have been quite a kind of an insightful time. Over that time, what would you say kept drawing you more into the operational side of businesses then, and slightly less of a focus on just the accounting and the finance?
The biggest thing that I realized in it, and I actually got a little bit of this from my restaurant days, manufacturing, the belief is that it's equipment and it's conversion, but manufacturing is also people. The company that I was chief operating officer for, we had 3,500 employees. And as the chief operating officer, yes, I was responsible for pushing product out the door that was safe and of high quality to deliver on time, but I also had responsibility to 3,500 people, 3,500 families, multitudes of kids in those families. So my ability to run the business efficiently was important because those folks needed the work, they needed the paycheck. So I enjoyed operations from that perspective. It was about the people. I enjoyed promoting people from within, finding a machine operator and giving them a responsibility for multiple machines on a shift. And then 2 years later, giving them full shift responsibility over the department. That's what is the best part about manufacturing and operations is the people. The equipment takes care of itself with the engineers, but it's the people.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and as you say, it's a big responsibility when you have, 3,500 families. I'd be interested, like a question that comes up from time to time, I'd be interested in your viewpoint on it. What do you think about the pros and cons of automation then, if it's potentially, putting people out of jobs versus, the long-term competitiveness, of a company or of a plant? How do
Mhm.
you look at that?
Automation has its place in the business that we were in. We did a lot of private label work. So as long as you have repetitive production that you can automate and add in auto case erectors, auto pick and place, putting product in the boxes, moving to automatic taping to automatic palletizing, and then sending a pallet to the back door, all of that works when your product mix is not diverse and it's stable over a period of time. So where we found opportunities to automate and add something, it was because we knew it was going to be stable and the justification was there. What I see in a lot of companies when I do go out is they introduce a product and they automate it right away, and they spend an extra few $1 million to make sure that there's absolutely the least amount of labor in it. And then 6 months later, their customer says, you know what, instead of a 12 count case, we need a 4 count open top tray because we like that better on the retail shelf. Can you do that? And then they've automated away from that. So that's one of the challenges. But again, it gets back into the stewardship of 3,500 employees. So if you have to do a project that's going to remove 100 people from the factory and it's justified for the business to be healthy, it's the right thing to do. And usually those projects take a period of time. And those 100 people aren't released. You just, through normal attrition, can absorb them and reduce your hiring otherwise. So it has its place for sure.
Okay. So after this period of working working in these businesses, learning a lot, what led you to start your own business?
I left that business. That was about a $350 million plus per year candy company. I left during COVID. All of our factories, the candy factories were across the border in Mexico, where I had gone every day. So we obviously had challenges during that time, but we also had a change in the CEO role, and there was kind of a different business philosophy that instead of us being 100% aligned all the time, we were kind of at odds. And I had been there a long time, and I realized for the business to be successful ongoing, this guy needs somebody that he's fully aligned with. So we parted ways. And from that time, I looked at utilizing what I learned in all of those experiences to help other businesses. So I went to a tea company in Georgia. They make private label tea bags for hot tea use, but also iced tea for Chick-fil-A and other businesses like that. I entered that business in the middle of COVID where all of the plastic shields were up at the time and 6 feet, and they had no plant manager, no maintenance manager, a HR manager hanging by a thread, but yet they were considered important, obviously, to the food chain at that time. So I flew in, gave them some advice on some things that I would help them with, and I was planning to do it as a consultant, but they wanted me to relocate and to take the business over. So we stabilized, and the first thing that I did, which was very controversial, is I stopped overtime. They were working mandatory overtime every week, burning their people out, having immense turnover in a time that was hard to hire. So we stopped that immediately. We stabilized. We cut some orders, but we stabilized the workforce. We started listening to the workforce as to what they wanted and what they needed to be successful. And then I started building a team, got a good plant manager, hired a couple of excellent engineers to help with continuous improvement and reliability engineering, and really built a strong team there. And then I realized that skill set is transferable. So from that point forward, I stayed independent and helped businesses that I came across and kind of to do the same thing.
That's brilliant. I have a quick follow-up question on that then. So that decision where you decided to cut overtime, just talk me through that a little bit more. What led to, what things were it that you saw, either on the walk around the business or with the conversations with people that led you to think that was the right decision?
Anytime I enter a business, I obviously hear the perspective of the owner, the president, the vice presidents in their areas, and what their perspective is of the challenges the business faces. But that's usually about 30% of the story. So I spend time on the production floor speaking with shift management, department managers, and then I walk and talk with the employees themselves too. And usually you find that that exercise has not been done by the owner or the president in months and maybe ever. So then I'm able to bring the voice of the floor up to the main office and talk and say, okay, here's what you thought the issues were, and here's why you think that we're having turnover, and why you think that we're having quality problems is lack of motivation or poor training, or the floor leadership is bad. What I'm being told is that you've worked these people 6 days a week for 5 months and not taken a single Saturday off. They miss their families. It's a time of COVID and everybody's worried about everything anyway. And your only focus is saving your business, and your employees are taking the brunt of it. And so by doing that, then we started to say, okay, how do we react to this? So I had pushback from finance and sales right away that says, well, we still have to get the product out the door. We have to do this to save our business. And I said, well, you're about 2 months away from losing your business because 40% of your employees out there right now are looking for jobs. So we compromised, and I said, okay, no more overtime for the next 3 weeks, Monday through Friday, standard shifts, and we're going to prioritize the customers. The big ones that we can't afford to use, we're going to ship to them. Some of the other ones, we're going to inform them that, hey, we're in a pandemic and we're going to be a little bit late, but you're going to get your product eventually. And then 1 out of every 4 weeks will kick in and work one shift on a Saturday to help push more product out. It lowered the pressure within the whole business, and it turned pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Do you think at that level of the CEO, the owner, to sometimes that what do you think leads to getting to that situation? Of them not of walking around and having those conversations and finding out what's going on at the shop floor level?
It's blinders, and you see it really. That was an extreme case, but you see it in a lot of cases where the production floor, that's where the dirty work happens. It's a lot of times the leadership don't really understand what's going on out there, the chain of events, the interdependencies of the production lines, and the supply of materials coming in. That's the hard work. You've got to get in and dig. They would, in many cases, prefer to look at the financial statements. They will look at sales trends. They want to look at that stuff. And rather than going out and asking the reasons, sometimes the message kind of comes through finance to ownership, and it's deemed to be 100% valid. And it's always really around the financial statements.
Okay. Got you. All right. So you've kind of touched on some of the issues with more traditional cost accounting and some of the problems or the missings from that. What would you say in terms of what you think is a better way then? What would you say successful manufacturers in that instance are doing to balance financial reporting, planning, and operations?
This is where the controversy comes in, and I never propose a second set of books. You have to close the books. You have to be compliant. You have to fully value your inventory. So therefore you have to go through the process I mentioned of accumulating a budget, allocating costs to units, and that's how you get to cost of goods sold, because the government wants their taxes. They want to understand net income in a clear and equitable way, company to company. But that information, when you turn and use it for operational information, decision making, and especially your pricing model is so inaccurate that it drives very bad decisions. So what I propose and what I've done in multiple places is to say, okay, let's look at the opportunity in front of us. If we take, I'll give us a very specific example. In the candy company, one of the heads of sales came to me and says, Jay, I've got an opportunity for 1,000,000 pounds of gummy bears. When I go to finance and they cost it out, they're telling me I have to sell at no less than $1 a pound. And these are very simplistic numbers. And I can't get the business that way. And I said, well, where do you really need to be? He said, I probably need to be in the low 90s, but there's no profit in it at that. So I said, give me a day. Let me get back to you. So when I went and asked the plant manager, the scheduler, the supply chain folks in the factory and said, okay, today we're sitting at, actual utilization of our assets, we're probably fully utilizing about 2.5 shifts of work every week but running a 3-shift operation. So we've built those inefficiencies into our cost. So I said to them, what is the cost, the true cost of saying yes to this $1,000,000 opportunity? If we say yes, we're going to spend obviously material cost, packaging cost, boxes. We're going to have freight. We're going to have a few other things by saying yes. And I looked at the plant manager and the HR manager there. I said, how many people are you going to have to hire to get this 1,000,000 pounds done? And to give you a perspective, this is on a production line that produces about 500,000 pounds a week. So this equates to about 2 weeks production. I was told there's no labor added. We don't have to add one person. Mechanics, quality people, anything else. Nope, we're not going to have to add anything. How about utilities? Do we have to add utilities? Not really, Jay. And in fact, the scheduler came up and said, production schedules do this. So this 1,000,000 pounds helps us fill some of those gaps in there because it's going to come in weekly buckets. So I went back and we did the math, and the cost of saying yes was not the normal standard costs that we use. The cost of saying yes was about 35 cents a pound. So when I went back to the head of sales, I said, if you can get 95 cents instead of the dollar that they want, we're going to make plenty of money on it. And I didn't give him all the details, but I said, from an operations perspective, we support going after that. Had a conversation with finance. They agreed. He went out and got it. And that's kind of how we ran the business for a while. And you take those opportunities when you can. And as you get to a higher utilization of capacity, when you ask the question, what's the cost of saying yes? Most of the times then that says, okay, we have to add another shift or we have to add machine capacity. We have to do that. It's a different question with a different answer then.
Okay, that's interesting. I have a couple of follow-up questions for that then. Because you mentioned earlier you don't suggest or you don't recommend like running a separate set of accounts outside of that. So how would you do it? Would you just do this as and when kind of needed and, just do a project by project cost analysis?
Yeah, I mean, the typical way that it happens in our company and in the companies I was in the past and every place I've seen it, they've got a cost accountant or they've got an analyst in the finance group that has more focus on the operations. In the past, when a proposed P&L would be done for prospective business, that finance person would go to the general ledger and pull the costs, and the standard cost of a gummy bear is 87 cents a pound, which includes labor and all the other labor and overhead and all that. And that's what they would do, which is very easy, painless. And then they say, what's your price? Here's the margin. Our target margin is 35%. Doesn't meet the criteria, go do it. So what we did is said, let's look at the cost of saying yes. Let's look at only what comes in there. And we're not proposing that if your target margin was 30%, that you only make 30% over those incremental costs. But what you're trying to do is, can we say yes or should we say no and walk away? And that's it. So then there's a belief that on the back end, well, we have to track what we assumed during that business. So we have to take that individual customer in that line of business and run a P&L on that to see if it matched. That's unnecessary, because the perspective that I have is what you're trying to do is to make the most profitable portfolio of business from the sales side that can best consumes the full capacity of your manufacturing side. And as you fill up and you get a new opportunity that comes in, rather than necessarily saying, okay, we're going to have to add a shift, we're going to have to do this, one of the alternatives says, let's look at our portfolio, and then let's look at some of the customers who are troublesome, some of the customers who have a lower margin. And then you can say, okay, we've got another opportunity to replace them. So we can do one of two things. Let's issue a price increase to them. And if they accept it, we've improved our portfolio. If they don't and they move on, that creates room for more profitable business to come into that portfolio. So it's more of a conversation. You don't need to adjust your accounting. You just adjust your assumptions.
Okay, got you. All right, thank you for that. The second follow-up question was, I noticed on your books there, ones that stuck out to me is Profit First. By Mike Michaelowitz. I'm a fan of that book as well. I have it up there as well. I use it for our consulting business, our software business. I was just wondering, does that work for manufacturing businesses, or is there a point where because my feeling is it's more targeted at kind of smaller businesses? Do the principles in that book, well, maybe if you just explain the gist of it, the 30-second overview of it first, and do the principles in that work in manufacturing businesses?
Yeah, I mean, the principles of Profit First is, as you're setting up your business, you decide the profit on the products up front, and you make sure that that's always paid. When money comes in, there's an automatic bank account that ships money to a specific account that is profit. So you figure out what your profit is first, and then all the other things come in behind it. So yes, it's good for those types of businesses that are more labor, and there's not a lot of product cost and a lot of capacity issues and things. But the principles hold, because when let's say you and I are starting a manufacturing business from scratch. We have to make decisions on what we're going to sell, what the product features are, what the inputs are to that. So we make all of those calculations, and then we figure out, okay, how big of a building do we need? How much equipment do we need? So we make this fixed cost decision that's out there. And then before we spend $1, we look at that cost structure. And then the most important analysis you can do is a break-even analysis that says, okay, with what we've just decided, the decision on fixed costs, how many units do we have to sell to break even? And if you can't get there, if that's 1,000,000 units and you have an untested item, you're going to fail that test right off the bat. So the principles hold is build your capacity, build your fixed cost structure relative to the profit that you need to make. So some of the great stuff in that book is, if I build my profit in first and I want a big fancy office, I'm working out of my garage and I want to go rent some space, there's no room for that, because you've taken your profit first and then you decide, I can't afford that, because it's right there in front of you. So what it does is it helps you capsulize those decisions and do it. And that's what manufacturing needs a lot. It's sexy to buy highly automated equipment. It's sexy to have a fancy building with a beautiful office in the front. It just raises the amount of units you have to make before you hit break even.
Yeah, got you. Okay, thank you. That was a great breakdown. Tell me a little bit then about what your work looks like today. What are you working on at the moment, and what are you enjoying at the moment about working with manufacturing businesses?
So I work as a fractional chief operating officer. So smaller businesses that can't afford that position yet, they may be resting with an owner and a plant manager, or maybe they've got a vice president of operations who was a plant manager 3 years ago. They don't have the strategic person coming in, somebody that can look over the whole thing. So I fill that role fractionally so they can get the expertise that I bring, not at a full salary of a chief operating officer, but we make a decision up front as far as a time commitment and such, and they can get my services for the price of a plant manager, but it might be 25% of the time. So I do that. I also work with a restructuring firm when banks have clients that are in trouble. I go in and help them try to restructure operations, but also finance to figure out how we get the line of credit down to a manageable perspective. And that's using really, everything that I've done. But my focus right now outside of clients is writing books. So this book here is mine. It's Turnaround Revelations. It's a terrible cover, and I'm working on regenerating that cover, but it really is my 30 years of experience, and every single chapter in there challenges a paradigm that on how people lead and how people look at the numbers and how people negotiate and so on. But it's really the blueprint of a turnaround. The book that I just finished this week and I'm in editing, the goal is one of the most famous, popular manufacturing books ever made. It was written in the 1980s, and it's a narrative. It's a novel. So it tells the story of a guy who finds out that his plant is going to close because it's not profitable. He establishes a mentor relationship with somebody who asks him leading questions, and he figures out. And then by the end of the book, he has fixed it. But it's a true story, so it's easy to read. It's compelling. He talks about his Boy Scout troop that he leads and other things in there, and how that leads him to some principles. So I've written one called The Gap, and it's similar. It's written in the same format, but it amplifies the conversation that we've just had today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed The Goal. It was one of the first books I was recommended after in my first job. And yeah, the scout troop wanting to get to the next destination, and people carrying the bags off the kid at the back of the line. That was a really nice kind of parable way of explaining that, wasn't it?
Well, there's factories all over the world that refer to their bottlenecks as Herbie because of the goal.
Yeah. Who did you write Turnaround Revelations for?
For founders. So a lot of times founders, they begin with a business idea. They become an expert in what they know. Might be a machine shop. It might be, agricultural based work, whatever. So they're experts in what they do know, but they need help in the things that they do not know. They've been raised on their own ways, their styles of how they lead, and they've learned that the income statement is the Bible. It's how I run my business. I need the income statement. So I've written it for founders really because I'm really costing myself some money. Everything that you need to fix your business and to turn it around is in that book. And the last few chapters are, here's the exact mechanics that you need to do to fix your cash flow issue or excess inventory issue. It's written for them. But again, I address everything. When you're building your management team, most people want to find people that are just like them, that think just like them, and they interview for that. And I propose just the opposite. Find people that are absolutely opposite of you, people who are going to say no, people who are going to challenge you. So in the beginning of the book, I say, you might read a chapter of this book and say, this guy is absolutely out of his mind. That's fine. Move on, because 7 or 8 chapters in this book are going to clearly resonate with where you're at and the challenges that you have. If you need help, you can reach out to me, but otherwise, the book is designed to challenge people. And at least when they set the book down on their nightstand, they say, wow, there's a different way to look at some of this stuff.
So is that published and is that available now?
Yeah, it's on Amazon in ebook, soft cover, hardcover, and audio. The Gap will be out. I've got cover design working right now. I self-publish, so that will probably be out early August. And then I've got a third book that's about 80% done, and it's called The Numbers Don't Lie, but I've crossed out the don't in there, and it's all about how numbers can mislead. And I get into some sports analogies, but budgeting, zero-based budgeting, and a lot of other things there. So the series of books that I'm writing are called The Practical MBA, and it's really hearing from a non-academic about the realities of business and different ways to look at things.
Sounds brilliant, Joe. Really helpful for people. And it sounds like you're kind of really hitting your productive stride with all of this and enjoyed yourself. It sounds good. Thank you for spending the time today to come on the podcast. Really enjoyed this chat. Just before you go, I would just like to leave one takeaway. So what do you think is one thing a manufacturer could do this week to go about improving their profitability?
It's funny that I actually have a chapter in the book that says, here's 5 things you can do right now. Get off your butt and walk out onto the plant floor and do that. So it's being receptive to challenging your pricing paradigms and going out and saying to your salespeople, bring me every opportunity and we're going to pick the best one of them and we're going to aggressively go after it, because filling capacity is the most important thing. The CFO or your controller, somebody, they might squeal a little bit, but look at the cost of saying yes as opposed to your margin and how you think it might impact on your income statement. But from a leader perspective, the note that I took, and it's in my book, is replace yourself. Go out, look at your management team, find 1 or 2 people that you can begin mentoring, find your eventual replacement, because as a founder, you got to leave someday and you want the business to run. Go find somebody, begin a mentoring relationship with them, and then also encourage them to do the same. They can't move up unless they do it. So mentoring can be as simple as 30 minutes a week in my office. Let's just talk about family. Let's talk about challenges, but let's talk about something you encountered at work last week and how did you react to it? What was the outcome? How could it have been done better? Many leaders don't take that time. They don't see it as value added. And then when they're out, when they want to leave the business, or maybe they're out for a medical reason, they're irreplaceable. And that's the weakest position you can be in as a business.
Where can people go to find out more about you then?
My website is dobusinessbetter.com. And on there, I've got a lot of different resources as far as the services that I offer, the links to my books, and a lot of great information, especially for founders. And I work really in simple ways. Call me, we talk, and if we strike a common point, I'll say, here's how we can work together. And it's not always a fractional relationship. It could be task related that says, please come out to my plant and leave me a business plan, and that's it, and go. So I do any number of things, but the most important thing and how I choose the work is, have I met somebody in this relationship that I really root for and I want to help them in the business? If I get the idea that, they just want to hear something but not really act on it, then usually I say, well, here's a little bit of advice, good luck, but I want to find somebody that I can truly root for and get in and help them. And the satisfaction comes from that more than any consulting wages or anything.
Yeah, I've seen something grow in the success that comes out of that. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that conversation today. I really enjoyed it. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Martin.